All right, welcome back to another live. I'm your host, Joseph Lewin, and today I actually have a returning guest, Drew Sutton, from Drew Sutton Leadership. And man, super excited to have Drew on the show. He used to be a chief engineer at Lockheed Martin, has a lot of background in leadership in the tech space. And so we're going to really be diving into a conversation around how do you lead better, and specifically, now that he's kind of made a transition into consulting, coaching, he's focusing a lot more on small businesses. And so taking those learnings from corporate America, but then really bringing those to people who want to double their income and enjoy their life. And you can really do that as a small business owner. And so he's bringing his passion for leadership to small businesses. Before we dive in, this show is sponsored by Sell Through Social, which is the company that I'm running. And we all know that your best deals for consultants and agencies come through relationships, but so often we focus on lead generation tactics that are very transactional. And so I've put together a process to help business owners build relationships with the right people by starting a show similar to this one. It's way easier than you think. You can launch a show in less than a week and kick it off and start meeting the right people who can change your life and change your business. So if you're interested in launching a show, reach out to me. And with that, Drew, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
Yeah, so I want to kick it off with, why is developing yourself as a leader important? And specifically, as a small business owner, you've been grinding away, starting this business, you've got a couple employees. Why should leadership be something that you're focusing on?
So the first answer, and it's probably more the generic answer, this comes from John Maxwell, is what we call the law of the lid. So your organization and you personally, your family, your church, whatever you're involved in, can only be as big as you, the leader, are. So I grew up in a small business. My dad had a veterinary clinic. So I grew up in small business. And then I went and I worked in corporate America for almost 20 years. And I got to see leaders of all different sorts. And it is super true. Whatever organization, even if you're like in a sub department of of a larger business, the level of leadership that the boss has, that is the lid. And it's really sad because sometimes you have folks that are bigger leaders than you, and that is true for me as well. I've had some amazing folks work for me. If you don't constantly raise your level, then everybody is capped by you. So that's like the more generic reason, and it's a real reason. Um, the reason that I am so passionate about leadership is my first business we invested in. The leader of it drove it into the ground, and I've told the story in a couple different venues. So some folks may have already heard this, but it was a daycare, and the guy essentially took out a bunch of credit cards and bought the most expensive of everything. Like he bought everybody a $3,000 laptop for a daycare, right? He hired the staff before there was kids. He did the most expensive upgrades to the buildings. And it was all because we're going to do it with excellence. That was his excuse for not paying attention to the budget and making the hard choices. And he ended up wrecking. I gave money. Some other folks gave money. It took me 5 years to dig out of that, like to get back to zero. And
Wow.
and that's really when I was like, man, a leader can ruin far more lives than an individual can. So if I want to help people in the future, I want to help them be great leaders because that leadership, it goes back to the law of the lid. I want to be a part of organizations that change the world. And so I want to learn how to do that. And then I want to teach how to do that. So that's what drives me. But it's also, we're on an adventure. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but we only get one trip around this rock. Like, I think because we grow up in a very media driven society, we go to college and we're told about this thing called a career path. And we like have this idea that one day I'll be an adult or one day it'll be my life. But no, if you're in your 20s, if you're in your 30s, if you're in your 40s, if you're in your 50s, you only get one chance. And so let's go have an adventure, and to have an adventure and to go out into the woods. Like I'm a Boy Scout, I'm an Eagle Scout. I spent the summer between high school and college backpacking the entire summer, like in a tent. It was amazing. Part of me wonders, why did I ever stop? my kids are teenagers, so now we're going to do it some more, and I'm getting to share that love with them in a deeper way. But the point is, you're either sitting on the couch and not adventuring, and then your life is going to be over. Or just go out there and have the adventure. And that means bumps and bruises and scratches and scared and anxiety, but it also means amazing views and life
Yep.
worth living. So that's kind of what motivates me, is to help folks live their adventure successfully and then make the impact for the people that they're called and meant to serve.
Yeah, and I want to just extrapolate on that from things that we've talked about already. And I mean, I share a similar vision and passion. Like my kids are 11 down to 2.5, and who knows, maybe we'll tack a few more on there. And so then, it's your kids are only little for a small amount of time, and it's becoming a lot more real to me because I'm watching my 7-year-old, or really my 3-year-old, start to make these transitions that my 7-year-old did, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's only been 4 years since Lucy was that size, and she's already so different. Like I can't do the same things with Lucy. She might still come running out of her room and give me a huge hug, but not every day. It's not quite to the same level, and I can't hold her for as long anyway. But Josie comes running out of the room this morning, and she runs down the hall and jumps in my arms, and it's like, man, she's only that size once. And I think even more so than looking at your life, it's like, if you have kids, that window of your kid being that size and being in your life and having the opportunity to sow into them and to be there for them, it's such a short time and such a short window. And leadership, especially if you own a company, can make or break that, not only for you but also the people on your team. And it could just be these small choices that you're making, whether it's on purpose or an accident. Like, you're making choices whether you've decided to make a choice or not. You've chosen to do things in a certain way, either by default or by intention. And if you're doing things by default, a lot of times you end up hampering yourself from getting the opportunities that you want, from being able to spend time with your kids, and then if you're not careful, you're not only doing that for yourself, but you're doing it to people on your team. So if your leadership choice is making everybody on your team work 50 or 60 hours, and half the things they're doing are a complete waste of time because you haven't really looked at the numbers and you haven't figured out whether that's right or not, you could be forcing them to be missing time with their family and their kids for something that doesn't even matter and isn't even going to move the needle.
Yes. And sacrificing for the greater good, or for the company or for the team, that's a deep part of life. But sacrificing for no reason, that is just a shame, right? Yeah, I love what you're saying. Yeah, the leader. Oh, I had for example, we were doing a big proposal at work, and the team was behind schedule for the proposal, and so it was either work some on Saturday, or because the due date was Monday afternoon, it was either work some on Saturday or work a crazy amount on Monday. And I said to the team, well, the leader at the time was like, hey guys, you've been working super hard on this, because he noticed the team was stressed. We're all starting to bicker at each other a bit. And he's like, just take the weekend off. We'll figure it out on Monday. I'll get an extension to the deadline. Don't worry about it. And I raised my hand and I said, are you going to get an extension for the deadline, or do we have an extension for the deadline? Because those are two very, very different things. He's like, no, don't worry. I'll get it. Rolls around to Monday. We don't get an extension. So now we're looking at delivering a late proposal. And because if you deliver it late, it's just a big zero, right? So we submitted a proposal we weren't the happiest with, because the leader wanted to feel like one of the good guys. He he boosted morale, sure, but he cost maybe us the bid. Yeah, as a leader, you control people's overtime. The stuff you choose to do here, like in week 1, affects what we're doing in week 12. And the individual contributor is not the same way. What the individual contributor does affects this much of the timeline, but what the leader does affects this much of the timeline, right? And of course, you have Madoff and Enron and some of the great scandals of our history, but yeah.
I mean, and I think for bigger teams, it's more obvious in some ways, because if you've got 40 or 50 people on your team, and you make a tiny micro decision at the front end, it could totally destroy or make it way better at the end. Whereas I feel like with a lot of small businesses, it's not always that clear, but the reality is still the same. Like, when you have a smaller team and there's just a few of you working, it's kind of like everybody does a little bit of everything. It's not very clearly tracked. And so it's very easy to be focusing on things that aren't moving the needle, but nobody's measuring that. So then you come to the end of the project and everybody's worked 80 hours and, we've all sacrificed for the greater good of the team and the business. And then as an employee, you're like, well, okay, I just laid it all out there. I'm not actually on the upside of it at all. and,
Hmm.
and, I'm getting a paycheck. That's fine. And I believe in the vision of this company and I want to see it succeed. Okay, that's great. But if we would have done things differently, I could have worked half the amount of time and we would have gotten the same end result. And so I'm really sacrificing for nothing. And I think as leaders, it's really important to dig into what your team is doing and understand what's actually moving the needle for your team and say, is this activity going to drive higher margins, better result for our client, and better outcomes? Or is this something that looks really good, but isn't actually going to move the needle or makes us feel good as a leader, but isn't going to move the needle? I mean, an example of that would be hiring a bunch of extra people on your team because it makes you feel good. Like, hey, we're growing. We've grown our revenue because we brought on this new client, and now we need to grow our team to match that. But your profit margins aren't any higher. In fact, your profit margins go down when you bring on that client, but it makes you feel good because your company's growing and you get accolades and you get to be part of the Inc. 5000 that you paid to be part of or whatever. And it makes you feel really good. But then that client churns because they weren't a good fit client and you knew it to begin with, but you kind of like hoped that they would be. And now you have to let 5 people go from your team because you brought on a client you shouldn't have because it made you feel good. And those are leadership decisions that in the moment, if you're not really intentional about thinking through the end outcome, you can end up having some seriously disastrous outcomes from it that could ultimately sink your business too.
Yeah. So another thing I tell people, oftentimes the question of like the work-life balance comes up because that's a popular phrase in our society. And I ask people, "Are you alive at work?" And they're like, "Yes." I was like, "Okay. So there's no balance. Like you're either living at work doing something that matters, or you're not. That's fine. In which case, you probably should find something else. And then you go home and you're alive. And a lot of my greatest personal development leadership moments came from mess ups that I had or coaching sessions from some of my good mentors. Um, so people act like work is over here and then life is over here, but no, the whole thing's life. And as leaders, we can contribute to that, so we can grow our people, and then they're going to take those lessons, those character lessons, and they're going to go home. Like for instance, when you're a manager, you have to learn forgiveness, right? But I remember before I was a manager, I learned time management, and I learned actually I learned about personality styles at work. Like I went to a training and we learned about personality styles, and that drastically affected how I parented at home
Mm.
and how I interacted with my wife. And so leaders, I think that we abdicate the moral responsibility to grow our people because we want to say, oh, there's just this work-life balance. But no, especially in a small business, you're more of a tribe that has a product that they all produce than you are a corporation. And so as the leader, you have to understand that what we're doing here not only carries over to the home life, but actually it deeply impacts like the character traits and the ethics and the morals that I'm instilling and I'm punishing or letting go, like letting occur in the workplace, shape the people that work for me, and then they're going to
Yep.
take that home with them. And that moral obligation, I think people are like, well, it's not my, it's not my thing. Like it's your thing, and then when you're at work, you just do what I ask you to do. Um, whether you want it to be that way or not, the fact of the matter is what you do at work affects your character and how you see the world and your
Absolutely.
positivity or your negativity. And then that carries over to the home life. Um, so
Yeah. I
sorry,
agree.
I got a bit of a soapbox there.
No, I totally agree with you. And I mean, I've been in some pretty interesting situations. There was one time, and looking, basically I was barely not a teenager. I'm 20 years old, working for a company, and um, I was leading a team installing security system in a big department store, and we had driven 17 hours to get to where we were going. And then we worked like 15, 17-hour days to get this project done. And we
Mm,
barely got it done on the deadline. We were supposed to go down to a different part of the state and drive like 4 hours and meet somebody first thing in the morning. So we drive down and we got in at like 1 or 2 in the morning. And then we're supposed to go do this store walk at 7:30 in the morning. And So I reached out to my boss and I was like, we really need to push that back. Like, there's no reason we can't reach out to this guy on the other end and push that back. And he's like, no, you need to go do it anyway. Like, show up. And, in hindsight, I don't even know exactly what I would do in that situation now, but I would definitely take a different approach than I did. But I basically had to force the guy that's working with me to do something that was honestly probably illegal and definitely unethical. And then, I'm then putting my morality and my reputation on the line to do something that was not right. Wasn't the right thing to do in any way, shape, or form. And to sacrifice for the team, and all these things that a leader can say to get you to do things that you shouldn't do. But then, yeah, I mean, it affects who you are as a person. And
It does.
thankfully, I recognized that wasn't right. And actually, like a decade later, I still knew the guy that was who had been working for me, and I called him and I was like, man, I just want to apologize for like 10 years ago doing that to you, because it was wrong. I should have stood up more for you as your manager and stood up for us. But anyway, if I would have kept doing that and I didn't really recognize that was decaying me as a person, then you just do that over and over again, and it changes who you are in a really
Yeah.
negative way.
In those moral moments, sometimes we make the wrong decision, and then when we fess up and we clean them up is part of the character problem or growth, right? I remember once I got access to our company buyer list. So like I knew all the prices of all of the things. And I worked for a couple of companies. I'm not saying which company it was. But I ended up with this price list. And I desperately at the time wanted to start a manufacturing, like a small manufacturing shop. So I had the price list of all of my competitors essentially. Um, and nobody knew that I had it. It was just a weird set of circumstances. I ended up with it. And nobody knew that I had it. And the moral part of me was like, oh, we need like do the work function that you need and then take it back. But then the part of me, the ambitious part of me was like, but I have this information. I should keep it. I should build a model off of it. And I didn't do anything with it for 3 days. It sat in my backpack at my house. And I knew that I needed to take it back to work, but I also knew that I desperately wanted that information. And ultimately, after 3 days, I did take it back to work. But that really level set my self view of myself. I was like, oh, you're not as righteous as you think you are. Right? Like it took you 3 days. And so sometimes I'll say, are you a 3-day person? Like I was like, oh, I ultimately did the right thing, but not right away. It took me, 72 hours. So today in that same situation, it's a non-starter, like because I wrestled through that
Yeah.
question in my life. And so I'm like, listen, it's easy. You take it back the first day. There's not even a moral question. I will be able to be a success later in the life. I don't need illegal things to help me get an edge, right? But I recognize the moral question, and that's not a moral question you get to if you never go to work or if you just, stay in your little bubble. As you grow, you
Yeah.
hit moral challenges, and I think as leaders, we can tell these stories to our people and be like, "Hey, I remember I was on a work trip, and I knew a guy. He was married, and he hit it off very well with this lady at the bar." And
Mm.
I grabbed a hold of him and I was like, "We are leaving, right?" And later he called me back up. He was like, "Man, that was a bad situation. Thanks for saving me from that." And I was like, "We're all human. Like,
Yeah.
I don't judge him because of that situation. We had a great mentoring conversation, and honestly, I think he's a better man for it to this day." Um,
And so are
the
you, because it's like if you've helped somebody else in that situation, if you find yourself in a similar situation in the future, it's going to help you make the right decision also. If you're by yourself and you're feeling, whatever, and if you travel for work, that's a tough situation.
it's
Then, it makes you really recognize like, hey, I coach somebody else not to do this. And, it kind of helps you make the decision without going through the process yourself on the negative side.
Yeah, and as when you're in leadership, and I don't think people really appreciate it until you start getting into higher levels of leadership. There's kind of no guide rails. So like when you're an entry level person and you're doing the job, right? You go to your ethics trainings and like there's people overseeing you, and there's just things you can and can't do. As you climb the ladder, or in a small business where you go from like chief cook and bottle washer to chief cook, there's nobody there telling you no. So your level of internal character things that could destroy the company, you're allowed to do them. You should choose not to do them because they'll destroy the company, but you're not allowed, but you can get away with it for a certain period of time, right? Like you can fudge the proposal, you can skip the work you were supposed to do for the client. Like if you're an electrician, you could do bad wiring, but the house is going to burn down at some point. And sometimes you need somebody to talk to, who's not going to judge you. And I think that that's what, as I've lived my life, and this is kind of why I got into coaching, is I found myself in these conversations with these leaders. And I remember one guy, it was, I mean, I don't know. I think that both of our audiences have some sort of religious bending, but I consider it the Lord. You could just say it was the universe. I got moved from the back seat of the airplane to the front seat of the airplane. And I'm sitting next to this VP of a very large company. And we're talking, and I helped him solve a problem. And he shows me his team. And he's been away from his wife for a year, living in Vegas. His team is all extremely attractive folks of the opposite sex. And I said, so which one are you having an affair with? And he was like, I was going to start with Catherine this week. And I was like, that sounds like a bad idea. And so he and I were able to have this dialogue about, he knew it was wrong, but he had he had ignored the boundaries that he knew that was, he ignored healthy boundaries. And I mean, he was a guy of power. He was very rich personally and then influential at the work. And I was like, man, you're going to wreck your life if you do this. Let's have a talk about that. And we were able to like jump tracks and then keep him on the straight and narrow, as it were. And that's, those conversations, obviously you don't want to be in that conversation on the one hand, but to be available to leaders who are like, and
for small business owners, especially, they don't have that. Like you're saying, you can make whatever decision. And I mean, as a small business owner, you can get away with almost anything. I mean, and even like, even things that are totally illegal, you're not really typically going to get caught for breaking certain employment laws and things like that. I mean, it happens all the time. And a lot of times, I mean, I've worked in the services businesses a lot, and, just kind of blue collar work. And there's all kinds of stuff that we would do that was completely illegal and, or against OSHA regulations or whatever. And I mean, to be realistic, OSHA's extreme. And when you work in the trades, you're like, there's literally no way we could ever be profitable on any job ever.
That's right.
So it's tough. You kind of have to do that to some degree. But there were also things that would happen that were like crazy, and then the small business owner, they don't know. It's not even necessarily that they're doing it on purpose, but they're uneducated about whatever that is, and they're having their team do crazy stuff. And there's not going to be accountability unless somebody legitimately dies or gets seriously injured. And then all of a sudden, there's some reckoning at that point. But until that happens, or unless that happens, then you can do all kinds of things that are shady and unethical and crazy and get away with it.
And so many times like, I don't know, it's like something grabs a hold of you. You're like, I don't want to do that. I know this is wrong, but also I'm not willing to admit whatever. I'm not willing to face up to whatever. If I do the right thing here, it's going to eat into my profit margin. And you don't have a sounding board to talk that question through. And a lot of times the consequences that you're like, well, I can't, we'll say we can't get hard hats for everybody. Because it's so expensive. You need somebody you can be like, but I think everybody needs hard hats. And you're like, okay, well, let's really start scoping that problem down. What's the problem here? Could you ask your employees to pay for half of it? Like, let's solution this together. In a larger business, you have peers where you can like talk to your other department heads, or you can go up a level and talk to somebody. You can talk to HR. Something huge like Lockheed or Bell, you have coach options. Like you can talk to the ethics group, and you can have folks. And then there's a bunch of resources. So maybe we can bring in resources to resolve. In small businesses, you're right. They don't have that echo chamber or that person to talk to, the sounding board, and they don't have the extra resource, or at least they don't feel like they have the extra resources. And so having that network of folks you can pull on is super helpful.
Yeah, and I have a couple more questions I want to get through, and we've been going on tangents. But one last thing before we move on, as you're saying that, and I know you're in the coaching and consulting space, and so am I. So it's a little self-serving, but I've worked with a lot of small businesses. I worked for a lot of small businesses, and I'll just say that, man, you can overcome serious costs to your business by finding somebody that you trust to speak into your business. And as soon as you can do that, now I understand, like, when you're just trying to pay your bills, you got to do that. But before you really hire employees in, you need to get to a financial space and make sure your product is sound enough so you're actually profitable. If you're not
Mhm.
profitable, you should probably not be hiring a bunch of other people to come into an unprofitable business. It's not really a way
Yeah.
to manage success. You got to make sure you actually have product market fit and all of that. And a lot of times, small business owners don't. They just take on a job. They don't know if they're profitable or not. Then they hire people in to fulfill that job, and then they find out I'm not making any money, and then I don't
Yeah.
have any margin to bring people in. But anyway, the point is, as a small business owner, my opinion is that it's way better to find a consultant than to hire somebody in to solve a problem until you absolutely have to hire someone. And then you get somebody who really knows what they're talking about. They're going to help you get over so many problems that you'll run into in your business because they've been there before, they've walked through it with other people. And then to have some kind of leadership coach, somebody, or be in a mastermind or something, and obviously I have you on the show, so talk to Drew if you're in that
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
But whoever you're going to find somebody that you trust to speak into those situations like you're talking about, because being an entrepreneur is a lonely road. And, if you have a spouse who's not supportive, it's really tough. But if you have a spouse who is supportive still, they can only take so much and they can only understand the situation so much. And there's so many other emotions that are tied to starting a business like that. You can't put all that pressure on your spouse. It's not right to do that to them. And so finding somebody that can really help you manage this or navigate those murky waters is important, because otherwise you can find yourself 5, 10 years into your business. And I've seen it for people I've worked for, where you get 5 or 10 years into your business and it's running you, and you're not really making money, and you're working 70, 80, 90 hours a week. And you for what? So that you can hire more team members and have bigger logos and make it higher on the Inc. 5000 without ever actually being profitable, without
Yep.
making any reward for yourself at all, and leveraging your family and not seeing your kids. Also, that, or even maybe you are making money, but you're making these choices that are morally bankrupting you every time that you're doing it. So you're making tons of money and you're getting accolades and everybody thinks it's awesome. But if you don't have a sounding board who's going to say, hey, maybe you shouldn't be treating your vendors that way. What is that doing to them? What is that doing to you to do that? And so, yeah. Anyway, I want to transition though to you've led teams as an engineer, and you were a chief engineer at Lockheed Martin, so that's a pretty serious leadership role.
Yeah.
So what do you wish you knew when you first started it as a leader, that you learned through experience?
Yeah. So I'll kind of answer this. We'll do an organizational answer to it. We'll do a personal answer to it, and then we'll do a kind of a moral answer to it. The first thing that I would do, and I've done this, like for instance, I did this with one of my clients. We did this simple exercise, and literally because of this, the next month he did more work that month than he had done the entire previous year. Okay, like this. I mean, we're talking seven-figure numbers here. His rhythms. So GSD, which is get stuff done. I actually call GSD glorifying stress and distraction, right? Right, because it feels good to be the center, and
I
you're
like that.
plugging all the answers into. I'm the most amazing, the best carpenter, the best electrician, the best engineer, the best whatever. And I was 100% that way. My previous role had been based on me being smart, and so I could. It was me. I'm going to solve every problem. Well, the problem is you get in there as a leader, and the decisions you're making are like 2 weeks and 90 days out. That's when that's when the check comes due, as it were. So set yourself rhythms and say, this is everything that I as a leader have to listen to or learn. I have to assume so much information, and then I have to make decisions. And that's all you're doing as a leader is you're collecting data, and then you're making decisions, and you're collecting data. And by making decisions, I mean, you're setting priorities. So you're collecting data, you're reprioritizing the stack, you're authorizing people to work, you're collecting data, you're prioritizing the stack. And that's your entire life as a leader. The individual contributor doesn't appreciate that. Like if you're cutting steel or welding something or doing electrician work, the leader gives you a packet of work and then you do your work, right? That's your entire day. But as a leader,
Yeah.
you shouldn't be doing any work. So what should you be doing? That's where rhythms come in. So I have a very discrete 2-week cycle. I find that you can't do it all in 1 week, so I do it in 2 weeks. It's kind of a modification of the agile production system. Agile, of course, comes from software development. But the idea is on Mondays, you do status work and some prioritization work. On Tuesdays, you tell your team what they're supposed to do. Then on Wednesdays, you check a certain metric. And on Thursdays, you check a different metric. And then on Fridays, you write up the summary of the day. And then sometimes you have to go in the weekend to stay on track. So the first week is the next 2 or 3 weeks worth of work. That's all you're focused on. The second week, all you're focused on is work that is 90 days out, 60 to 90 days out. When I was at Lockheed, we used to write big reports. Like some of the reports were 300 to 400 pages long.
Wow.
You can't write a 300-page report in a week or even in 2 weeks. Like that is a lot of work, a lot of work. Okay, so I have to have that big work that's coming out in the future. I have to have my eye on it, and I have to have my eye on today's work. And I have to have my eyes on kind of some middle work, like let's break the big project into smaller tasks. Let's have those tasks delivered on certain weeks. So I'm always going big task, medium task, little task, big task, medium task, little task. So I do those in 2-week sprints where the first week is today's work. And then I plan like the next couple of weeks. And the next week is months away from now work. And then I'm planning and chopping it up. And then it gets pulled into the next sprint cycle. Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right. So I wish that it took me literally 2 years to figure out that system. I wish that I had thought through that system better. So setting good rhythms and just obeying those rhythms and trusting that you've thought of everything that you need to look at, and then that there's a specific meeting to think through everything. If you try to keep it in your head, there's a really great book called Getting Things Done and by David Allen. And he says, if you have even one thing that doesn't fit into your rhythms, then you have to keep your entire life organized in your head, and you have to keep your system going. And eventually you'll just stop using the system, and then it'll all be in your head, and then you're going to forget things. And that's the chaos that we all live in. So you have to have a very rigid system. Again, David Allen's book, Getting Things Done, is fantastic. It's a good start for the conversation. I do rhythms, of course. I can come in and do a rhythm workshop with folks. So there's lots of ways to learn that. The next thing is problems. Again, GSD, get stuff done. I'm the center of attention. GSD is glorifying stress and distractions. Life is a whole bunch of problems. Like if you're an electrician, if you're a welder, if you're a production person, if you're an engineer, problem occurs. Now you can either send it up the chain and ask them, what do I do here? Actually, I'm going to do it in kind of a condescending voice. What do I do? And then I'm like, oh, great. I'm so smart. I'm going to solve your problem. That's super satisfying when you have 5 employees. But it prevents you from getting real work done because you have to solution it. They have to tell them. When you have 10 employees, that means that let's say that you have 10 employees and you're going to take 1 hour to solve somebody's problem. 1 hour. That means that 10 other employees are waiting in line for you to solve the first guy's. So you're wasting 10 hours of time as you solve the first guy's problem. You also just spent a 10-hour day because everybody has a problem every day. You spent a 10-hour day and you didn't get any of your job done. So you have no idea what's coming in 90 days. You have no idea what's coming tomorrow and 2 weeks from now. And then at 6 o'clock at night, when you should be going home and having dinner with your family, you're starting your day's work. That's the first hour where you can do work today because you were trying to solve everybody else's problems. So you have to train your team to solve their own problems. So the problems come up and they go down. They come up and they go down. And all they're telling you was, hey, boss, I bought another coil of copper wiring and it cost $400. And then I'm like, oh, thanks. So now I think, what does $400 do to the budget? We only need so much of that. Okay, that's fine. So you have to train your team to solve their own problems at every level. And then you, the boss, have to just take the impact of that decision and then adjust for it in the future. Does that help?
Yeah. No, I like that.
And model. Then the last thing I'll say is forgiveness. Every new manager that like becomes full manager level, I always tell them, I sit them down and I say, you need to learn how to do forgiveness. And they're like, forgiveness? Like it's not even a soft skill. That's like a personal skill. I'm like, yeah. But if you have 10 people and you give them all a task for the day and they all mess up once, that means you have 10 frustrations that have been, and then that happens every day. So you have 50 frustrations in a work week that are all legitimate things that are causing you problems. And if you don't master forgiveness, you're going to start hating people really quick. And then you get really snippy and critical, and it eats at your soul. And I say that because I was pulled to the side and they were like, you have to stop or we're firing you. And so I got some books on anger management and forgiveness, and it has made me such a better person and dad, and it has calmed me down. Anyway, so I've talked there for a while here. I'll let you jump in, Joe.
No, I appreciate all of those different things that you're talking about. With the problem solving portion, man, that is so difficult. And that's difficult at every level. Like I'll just say as a parent, the desire is just to solve the problem for your kid, right? They come up to you and they go, "Oh, I can't brush my teeth, whatever, because of XYZ reason." And you're like, "Okay, fine. I'll come find the toothpaste for you. I'll get your toothpaste out. I'll put the toothpaste on." It's one thing if you're doing that with your 3-year-old, your 4-year-old, your 5-year-old, but at a certain point, it's like, hey, like, there's a parenting thing that my wife and I have done called TBRI. It's trust-based relational intervention.
Okay.
It's really excellent, but it's, just kind of teaching you about understanding how children develop, and their brain isn't capable of certain things at certain times. That as an adult, we could get frustrated because we're like, is your brain not like functioning properly? And it's like, well, yeah, it's not, because they're
still like
3 years old and they're hungry and tired, So anyway, it helps, think through some of those things. But one thing they talk about is this phrase, pay now or pay later. And it's the idea of you can either deal with this problem situation now when it's at a small scale with a 3-year-old. And if you don't, you're going to be dealing with that when they're a teenager or when they're an adult. And it's going to be a lot worse when they're dealing with that as a teenager. Like, you have a 3-year-old that slaps somebody in the face or bites them. Okay. Obviously that's a problem, but they're 3. And so, but you could ignore it and just go, oh, they're 3. It's not a big deal. So they bit someone. Okay. Hey, not the best. But if you don't deal with that now, or anger, your child gets angry and goes into a rage and goes absolutely ballistic, caveat that with, hey, maybe understand the time of night or whatever's going on. Like, right. Maybe they're just exhausted and you do need to just chill. But at the same time, you have to be really intentional about, hey, where's this problem coming from? How do we deal with the heart issue behind this problem so that we don't pay in a much more significant way down the road? And you're going to pay at some point. So anyway, I think that applies to this problem solving thing also. Like, you can either teach your employee or your team member how to do something that they're able to then work through and resolve. And does that take a lot of your time? Yeah, it's going to take a ton of time. It's going to take emotional energy. It takes investment into that person. And if you do that, yeah, you're paying for it now. If you don't do it, you're going to pay way more down the road when they make a big mistake that costs a ton of money, or through your own time, where you're having to then solve all of these problems for everyone rather than teaching people how to do that. And I think a lot of people think of business as like, oh, we need to scale up, and the faster we scale, the better, and we're going to make more money, and we're going to have more employees, and we're going to have more revenue. But man, you shared a story. I don't remember if it was while we were on the live. I don't remember if it was on before or after, but about an investment that you made that the guy spent a bunch of money on really fancy equipment, and and it was this huge loss for you and for a bunch of other people. And he wanted to scale faster than where the company was actually at, right? And he wanted to do something that was excellent, and it's like the right part but the wrong implementation. And I think that happens all the time for businesses, where you want to do the right thing, but you go beyond where you're at. So like, okay, let's take on this big project. It's going to help us down the road. It's going to be awesome, but we're going to need to hire some more people, and our profit margins aren't going to be great. And this isn't the best fit client, but we're going to do it because it's going to be awesome, right? But then you scale beyond what your team can handle, and then you haven't taken the time to equip people to solve their own problem. And now you just doubled the amount of people you have, and you've created a multiplier effect of the negative things in your culture and in your business. And, I'm of the perspective that it's a lot better to grow slower and do things well, and learn how to do things well, and how to train your team and create that culture, and then scale at the appropriate time when you actually have equipped everybody, including yourself, to do that effectively.
Yeah. So, and that kind of gets into rhythms. Sometimes I call it time control. Like, if I could have any superpower, it would be time travel. I would be able to go back and forth, like, and then go back and fix something, and then go back and forth. That's the only thing that I would change. I super enjoy my life, but if I could time travel, that'd be amazing. If you hold good rhythms, you actually get a version of time control. So one of the rhythms that you should do every year is you should do a 1 year plan. So that's like a 3-day offsite. So you and your trusted folks, honestly, and you brought this up, it's probably not your spouse. Like I know a couple of folks whose spouse is their business partner, like in the truest sense, not just like drug along, but like they really
Right.
are business partners and married. Most people are married to somebody that is completely different than them. And that's because it's attractive and it's fun and they're refreshing. Like maybe you have somebody that's a elementary school teacher and then there's like a CEO. Like they're just very different and they enjoy the differentness. So somebody said to me once, you can marry a cheerleader, you can marry a partner, or you can just marry a roommate. So you should be cheering each other on, but don't if you married a cheerleader, don't take her on the strategic planning session. That's not her skill set. That's not her interest. She wants you to be a success. It's just not her. So find
Yep.
somebody. Sometimes you find a partner. Like I have a really good friend who owns a cybersecurity firm, and like he's the guy that I want on a strategic getaway with me. We don't have the same business, like, but we would swap. Hey, I'll help you. Hey, you help me. Like we're good partners. You can find that in church. Sometimes you can find that in a business coach or in a group, like you can join an association. Any rate, 3-day offsite once a year where you say, this is the 12-month plan. This is what we're going to accomplish every month. And this is how it like builds into that goal. And then, okay, cool. So now we have a 12-month plan. It takes about 3 days to put together. So then once a quarter, every 90 days, you get together and you check yourself to the plan, you make adjustments as necessary. And mostly you just like, oh, we didn't do enough sales calls. So we need to double sales calls this next. All right. How are we going to do that? So you don't adjust the plan, you adjust your behavior. You recognize your
Mm.
behavior. Sometimes a market force will happen. Like let's say it's 2009 or whatever, and the housing market crashes. Sure. But that's why you do it every 90 days. And you don't talk about, oh, Sarah's really irritating me or Jim isn't doing his work. Like that's a disciplinary conversation that fits somewhere else in the week. So what you do is a strategic planning, you do 3 days and then 3 1 days, and that's just a rhythm for the year.
Mm.
Then the other rhythms you do more regularly. And when you have those rhythms, you can be audacious enough to get this is my BHAG, my big audacious hairy goal. And then this is the steps to get there. And so a lot of people get bored or they get tired or they get frustrated. They're like, oh, I'm going to go do this thing. And then they overextend themselves because you should dream. You should have that big, hairy, audacious goal, but then you need to put it into a plan and then you need to maintenance that plan with rhythms. And that's how you prevent yourself from overextending is you're like, okay, what are my milestones this month? Okay, good. That's going to build up to this next thing. And then you're on a compounding interest curve.
Yeah, I love that. One thing that I'll add from my experience is as a leader, don't try to do too much at once.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got a team, even if they love you, even if they want to make it happen, people can only do so much and focus on so much at once. And the more things you add to focus on, the less effective you're going to be. So what are the actual priorities? What are the most important things? Not what would it be really nice if we could do 1,000 things.
Right.
What is the one thing or two things that each role has to do over the next 90 days or 180 days or year to really move the business forward? And if you add more than that, you think you're going to accelerate growth. But in my experience, the more you add, the less effective your team becomes.
I have a saying where you don't build a castle by juggling stones. You build a castle by taking one stone and putting it in the right spot. And then you take the next stone and you put that in the right spot. Juggling multiple stones does not build a castle.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, so I like talking to you. So here we're going to do a 20, 30-minute episode. We haven't gotten through all of our questions and we're 45 minutes in. But let me just ask you one last question that will, kind of tie us off here. So what is the biggest leadership gap that you see for small businesses, and what is the most effective way that you've seen them be able to solve that problem?
Yeah. So time management, I want to say time management is it. I think that's a big one. Honestly, though, it's roles and responsibilities. And this is small business and big business. A lot of people, they grow to the spot where they can't do it all. So then they just look for somebody to hire, and they hire a day laborer, or they hire their cousin. Most often they hire a cousin or a family member or a friend. And then they're like, okay. And then the judgment heuristic, or the error in judgment, is I like you, ergo you'll be good at this. Like, oh, I met you at church. You're a nice person. You'll probably also give to the library fund drive that I'm having. Well, just because I like you at church doesn't mean that you like libraries, right? That doesn't make any sense. But it's a judgment heuristic that we have in our own head. So we get in this spot as small business leaders, and we're like, I need help because we don't have enough time. But we haven't sat down with that strategic plan to decide what we need. We just need help. So then we
Yeah.
find something that we'd like, and we bring them on. And then we don't tell them what we want. We're like, okay, great, you're here. Now I'm going to go back to being frazzled and overworked, and you're going to fix this thing. Well,
Yep.
you're going to fix this thing is an ownership behavior. Like, that's what the owner has to do. Because there's all sorts of objectives. Like, if you don't own the budget, then you can't start a marketing campaign, right? So
Yep.
it's difficult for somebody that you just bring on to solve your problem. Ultimately, what really needs to happen is you bring somebody on to offload some very discrete piece of the work that you used to do. So electricians, maybe you run the wire for me, or maybe you cut the holes in the wall, or maybe you, I don't know, whatever you do. You're the solderer guy. So you take a
Yep.
task that you've been doing that is simple, that is easily to offload, and you offload that simple task to somebody else, which has discrete workflow or work instructions or standard operating procedures, or I can just train you to do it, right? You give that to them and you let them pick apples while you worry about what fertilizer needs to be done. And a lot of
Yep.
times, small business owners are like, I need to fertilize the orchard. Hey, can you come over here and fertilize the orchard so I can keep picking apples? Like, and
Yeah.
a lot of
Well,
times
and
they're like,
in that same vein, for small businesses, where I've seen huge challenge is, hey, we're gonna get somebody on our internal team that's never done this before. We're not gonna have any budget or very little for them to be equipped to do this, but then we're gonna expect for them to whatever. Like, hey, we need better project management. Hey, you're the more operations minded person. Go do a bunch of analysis of which software we should use, and then learn how to implement that software, and then learn the best practices. And then what you're going to end up doing is you're going to reinvent the wheel on things that you could have brought somebody in, paid them $5,000 or $10,000. They could have figured it out for you and tailor
yep,
made exactly what you need, build it out, train your team how to do it, and then maybe walk somebody on your team through so they can level up and they could gain in that skill, because you want people to level up. But then, you go, oh, well, we don't have $10,000 to spend on that. But if you don't spend the 5 or 10 grand on that issue to bring somebody in to resolve it from outside, like I'm saying, if you need to fix a problem, getting that outside help is actually going to save you a ton of money, because otherwise that person on your team is going to spend half a year and you're paying them $80,000 plus benefits and everything. You just spent 50 grand to do something that's going to be subpar compared to the 5 to 10 grand you would have spent to bring somebody in to actually solve the problem for you.
that is beautifully said. The cost of salary is forgotten because I just buy a person for the year, and then I just assume that they're making me money. And yeah, you can have somebody waste their time for half a year and still not have a good answer, or you could bring in somebody that was good at it. And there's lots of ways you can, like, uh bookkeeping. Bookkeeping is one of the first things that you should probably outsource. Well, somebody to manage your schedules and your appointments is the first thing you should outsource. The second thing is probably bookkeeping and accounting, because CPAs exist, and it's trivial in terms of salary to get them to do what you need them to do. Now, it can be expensive. Yeah, I get it. But you could also hire in somebody at $15 an hour or $20 an hour, but you're now trusting somebody with your most sensitive data, and you're paying them $10 or $20 an hour. So, but you can give to a CPA, and there's plenty of legal recourses to protect that. Yeah. So articulating to yourself, this is where I want to go, and it fits in the strategic plan. So I need to offload myself of this simpler tasks or this more complex task, but it has to be given to somebody that can already do it, because that's so much cheaper than finding somebody that can do it right is so much cheaper than saying, oh, well, Larry's my friend, so I should hire him. Or Sarah has some more time, so I should give this task to her. All of those are the same error, which is I can make anybody do this thing that I want them to do because it's hard for me to do it. Right. So it's either I can just get a friend to do it or I can get somebody that's already in my company to do it, but they don't have that skill set. And do you have the
Yeah.
skill set to train them? Probably not. That's why you're having trouble with it. So outsourcing it or hiring appropriately, that's probably the biggest limiter I see in small businesses.
Yeah. And, and I mean, I think the other challenge that you run into when you have somebody who doesn't really know what they're doing, so you don't fully trust them, is that you end up making them do the work more than once. And I've seen that also where, okay, we create this whole system and then the boss goes, this didn't quite work right. Let's do it like this. And they don't have any understanding of what it actually took to get there. So now it's like you're asking somebody to, for one, redo work, which is very demoralizing. And
Yes.
for two, you're asking them to redo work that they brought that up in the beginning and you didn't listen to them. And so you're asking them to redo something the way that they told you should do it in the first place, but you didn't take the time to listen or understand what was going on. And then, now they're going to spend an extra 10 or 20 or 30 hours doing something on top of everything else, but you don't have any idea how much time that's going to take. So a couple simple questions are, hey, what would it take to do this?
Mhm.
Oh, it's going to take 20 hours. Whoa, 20 hours. That's a ton of time. Yeah, it is a ton of time. Is it worth that person spending 20 hours to fix that problem? Or is it something that you should deal with what you've created? Or, better yet, you sit down and you actually understand what goes into something before you ask your team to do it and, get an estimate from them and then check in. Hey, is this still on track for what you thought it was going to take? And I've been part of that so many times, I can't even describe it. And for my personality type, that is the most demoralizing thing on the planet. When I'm like, hey, we should do something really simple, prove it out, and then build the next stage. And it's like, no, just build it out. We want to do it right. We want to do it with excellence. Okay, I can do that, but it's going to take like 5 weeks. So then I'm working 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week for 5 weeks to get it done. Then we get it done. Totally doesn't work because we built something nobody wanted. And then the boss is frustrated because they're like, whoa, you spent all this time, it doesn't work. It's like, well, yeah. I could have told you that. I did tell you that at the beginning and you didn't listen, but then, they get frustrated at the employee. So anyway, I think taking that extra time to like actually understand what goes into something. And then,
yeah, and that's why I keep talking about rhythms and strategy is we have a pain point. We vaguely think we know what the solution is. So then we pick somebody we like and we're just like, go make it happen. And then they discover all the detailed questions that are very difficult and that don't fit within the strategic plan. And then they make a choice, but they don't know what the strategic plan is. And so then they give you back something. And you're like, that's not really what I wanted. I don't really know what I wanted. And that moment, I don't really know what I wanted is an extremely important moment. It's very difficult for your ego. And I mean, multiple times I've had very smart people in a room and they're like, what do you want? And I'm like, I don't actually, and it's very hard, very hard. But that's where and some people are not gifted strategically. I actually intuit a lot of strategic things, and tactical things are more difficult for me. So I've had to learn the day-to-day tasks, but strategically, I just bend that way better. So getting somebody that's good at strategy and saying, okay, you want to go here. Why? What's the benefit? What's the cost you're willing to incur to get there? Okay, now what are the steps to get there? You get that ironed out. And then you can give it to people to go do. But a lot of times that strategic work is difficult and we intuit that it's difficult. And so we avoid it. And so rather than do the strategy, which is really ultimately my employee can't do strategy for the company because they don't own the budget, they don't own the future, they don't own the goals. So you're saying to them, hey, go do my job and I'll keep picking apples because I know how to pick apples. And by the way, I'm the best apple picker and nobody picks apples like me. We're the best. We're the best. Well, maybe you're not the best at picking apples. Maybe you're a slightly above average apple picker. Maybe you're a slightly below average apple picker. But picking apples feels like work because apples end up in the bucket and you're like, oh, I can see that I'm making progress. And then you hire somebody else to go do how much land should I buy for the orchard expansion? And you're frustrated because they come back to an answer to you that you don't really even understand all your goals initially. So you gotta you got to have the ego to say, look, somebody else is probably better at picking apples than me. Go pick apples because I can teach you how to do that. And I'm going to go decide what the next stage of the business is. But it's very difficult. Strategy is very difficult. Yep.
And if you're going to bring somebody in to do strategy from the outside or inside or whatever, you've got to actually trust them and follow their advice. I mean, obviously, you got to use your brain and not just do whatever. You got to really understand it. But then you got to take the time to understand it. Anyway, we could keep going forever. I have more thoughts on it. But thanks, Drew, for jumping on. This was a little bit more conversational than a lot of the shows, but I just enjoy talking about these things, and it's good stuff. So thanks so much for joining me, and sure we'll do it again soon.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks.